Hello friends, James Corbett here, CorbettReport.com, August 13th, 2018, and it's summer, it's hot, everyone just wants to cool down and relax a little bit. No one wants to hear about the never-ending stream of bad news and craziness and chaos in the world that clogs our newsfeed 24/7 these days, right? We want to take a little bit of a breather from that. And that's not just psychologically important. I think that's important on a deeper level, because if all we ever do is concentrate on all of the horrible news out there and the ways that things are going wrong and all the bad things in the world, then in a way we are doing the powers that shouldn't be job for them. We are mentally enslaving ourselves by concentrating on the doom porn and the fear porn in a sort of self-fulfilling prophecy way that instantiates that in the real world. So let's take a moment for a breather, for a little bit of good news. And not to steal the thunder, of course, from James Evan Pilato over at MeteorMonarchy.com, who does his regular Good News Next Week series. If you're not tuned into that, you should be. So I'll put the link in the show notes so that you can listen to that on a regular basis. But let's do some good news sleuthing of our own, and we'll start over at GM Watch, where you've probably heard the story by now, but in case you haven't, Monsanto has been ordered to pay $289 million in damages in a Roundup cancer trial in California, specifically a trial involving a groundskeeper, Dwayne Johnson, who basically was charging, and the jury found that Monsanto knew its Roundup and Ranger Pro weed killers were dangerous and failed to warn consumers. This is a landmark, incredibly important ruling, because of course this $289 million in this single case is just the very thin edge of a very large wedge with incredible implications, not only for all of the legal punitive damages that Monsanto will be on the hook for if this is allowed to stay, and if this decision stands. Many people already suing Monsanto over this issue. But then, of course, all the ramifications for actually getting these products, including glyphosate and its agrochemical toxic brethren, out of the food supply. This could be a very, very landmark decision. So, of course, it depends on how it stands up to appeal and all of this. It's not, let's not count our chickens before they hatch, but this decision was the right decision, and we should very much make that known before it is overturned on appeal, or Bayer Santo's lawyers end up overturning it. But on a very similar note, just a few days before that, Brazil judge suspends use of agrochemical glyphosate, talking about a Brazilian judge who has suspended the use of products containing glyphosate in his jurisdiction. And of course, this does affect Monsanto, which uses glyphosate in Roundup and its various agrochemical products. Of course, for people who don't know the significance of this, part of the GM issue is glyphosate, which is itself a weed killer, which a lot of these GM monstrosities have been genetically modified to resist, so they can spray the glyphosate all day long, which has made glyphosate the most used agrochemical in the history of the world, and it has all sorts of toxic effects, which are only now starting to come to light and be acknowledged in the court system. So a horrible nightmare for humanity that hopefully is starting to end. But again, we'll have to follow these court decisions and see what results from them. But people should be, in the meantime, taking, obviously, whatever precautions they can to control their own food supply themselves, as is always the underlying point of this type of story. An interesting story from Activist Post about the smart meter phenomenon, talking about a defeat of a smart meter proposal at a New Mexico Public Regulation Commission. People will know about smart meters and the dangers and things from Data is the New Oil, if no other sources. That was a Corbett Report episode recently where we talked about this issue. But hey, as Catherine J. Frumpovich notes, whoever would have even guessed that a state public utility commission would reject the smart agenda for asserting and implementing global control mechanisms by deliberately disapproving a utility company's proposal to retrofit AMI smart meters on its customers' electric service. And for those who are curious, here is the link to the actual PDF itself. You can read through the 121-page court document. But long story short, the application to retrofit the houses with smart meters has been disapproved because the findings... the plan presented in the application does not provide a net public benefit, and it does not promote the public interest. An interesting ruling. So, again, sometimes the gavel falls in the right way, and we should acknowledge that when it does. CNBC, of all places, has this interesting article about the cashless society myth PayPal, Square, and Bitcoin have not stopped cash from being a growth business, where they talk about not just US cash in circulation growing at 5% plus rate for the past 2 decades. That in and of itself is maybe not meaningful. It might be a deceptive statistic because, of course, US cash is primarily used to stuff mattresses overseas in countries where circular currencies are falling apart, or in drug dealing and things like that. So cash in circulation is not necessarily the figure to go by, but cash, more importantly, remains the most frequent method of payment in the US, representing roughly 31% of consumer transactions, more than electronic debit, or checks. And use of cash by US households is consistent across most income levels, around 25%. But of course, as you would expect, it goes way up at the lowest incomes, where people are debanked or not quite able to juggle multiple electronic payment accounts and things like that for their meager income. So there's a lot more detail about how these numbers break down in this, including the next big cash market may involve moving weed, talking about how weed delivery and things like this, just even physically moving it, might be funded by cash, because again, people are finding there are use cases for cash even in this digital age. So let's not worry about the cash. Well, let's not bemoan the death of cash quite yet. It is not dead. And again, that's another thing that we have an active part to play in choosing what we do with our money, quote unquote. All right. Speaking of going low tech in the face of the New World Order and the increasingly high tech, flip phones are back, less distracting and a lot cheaper than a smartphone. And it talks about a mini resurgence in consumers seeking less distraction, including going for flip phones over smartphones. And my next phone is absolutely going to be a flip phone, so I very much relate to this story. And I think that's an important trend that we should keep our eye on. Speaking of trends, low-tech trends, this article talking about summer camps and how they usually, 90% of nearly 8,400 sleepaway camps counted by the American Camp Association are now device-free, so no iPads and smartphones and what have you. And guess what? The kids actually enjoy it. And most kids find themselves happier and healthier after being in that. It was so fun. I wasn't craving the phone time. I think since I did have it, I wasn't as obsessed with using it. And this is too much phone time while we're on vacation. They can only be on their phones when it's daylight, blah, blah, blah. So talking about trends towards getting kids away from the phones and getting them out of the matrix and into the real world a little bit, as my kids are literally playing outside as I record this. So it is happening on a larger scale, and kids, believe it or not, actually enjoy playing in the real world when they are allowed to. And on a particularly good piece of news, I think this is particularly heartening. Americans overwhelmingly reject going to war with Iran, new poll finds. And basically the long and short of this, 23% of the public say they'd support the U.S. deciding to declare war on Iran, while the majority, 53%, oppose the idea. So that breaks down to 9% strongly support the idea of war with Iran, 37% strongly opposed. I think that's a pretty good result, considering the incredible amounts of money and time that has been spent propagandizing the public to demonize Iran, especially in recent months. It looks like the neocons have not achieved their dream quite yet. They're still working on it, don't worry, but at this point, the public is still not on board, so it will take some big engineered event, I'm sure, to try to get the public on board with going to war with Iran. Some engineered thing in the Strait of Hormuz is always one of the go-to plans, but people are more increasingly aware of the war lies, and I think this is reflected in findings like this. Now, of course, you can go and nitpick any one of these stories and find the dark lining to these silver clouds, but I think the point, again, is to not just concentrate on the doom porn and not just highlight when things are going wrong. We have to look at the good news as well, so that we understand what it is we are fighting towards and what we're fighting for. And on that note, I'm sure you don't need to be told all that. You're on vacation, I'm sure, enjoying yourself in the sun, so continue to do that, and I'll continue working on things here. Looking forward to talking to you again in the very near future. James Corbett, CorbettReport.com.